And today's Secretary of Defense Ash Carter admits while the decision will help fight ISIS, it does put the American forces in harm's way.
They do not have a combat mission. They have a training, advising, and assist mission.
Make no mistake, they will be in combat.
Just as the American who was killed when he ran to the gunfight in an ISIS hostage rescue in Iraq last week was not in combat.
That does mean that our men and women in uniform are going to be in harm's way. It means they're going to be taking risks.
He's put 50 brave Americans at risk without any hope of success.
It means they're in a dangerous part of the world.
The administration is now admitting they have special operations troops on the ground in Syria.
And it means that we owe them a debt of gratitude.
Because in the eyes of the enemy, sending 50 soldiers proves to them how weak President Obama is.
Former Navy SEAL and co-author of the brand new book, Extreme Ownership, How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win, Lieutenant Commander Leif Babin goes on the record. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Greta. Good to be with you tonight.
Been nice to have you. What do you make of the president's decision to send less than 50 special ops to Syria?
It's pretty frustrating to see that happen. I mean, I think it's too little, too late. Certainly, we've had a vested interest in what's going on in Syria for a long time. What really bothered me most of all was the fact that the White House is talking about there is no military solution to ISIS. In fact, the only solution to ISIS is a military solution.
So what do you think? I mean, what do you think is going on at the White House? They say there's no military solution, yet they're sending military there. They claim it's not mission creep, but they're sending more today than were there yesterday. They say they're not in combat, and yet we lost somebody in combat in Iraq last week. I mean, why is the White House? I mean, does the military? I mean, when the military hears these things, does the military think, this is a little bit crazy what the White House is saying?
Look, I think our men and women in uniform are focused on defeating our nation's enemies, and they're ready and willing to do so, to go into harm's way, to risk themselves. Unfortunately, they require leadership, and we got to have leadership who has a strategy. And this strategy is about building capacity in the local forces, as the White House spokesman said today. We tried that strategy for between 2003 2006 in Iraq, and it frankly didn't work very well. What we had to do was go and knock down the insurgents' capacity, and once we eliminated their military capability, dropped that down to a much lower level, then the local Iraqi police and army was able to defeat them, and that's exactly what we ought to do with ISIS.
A couple months ago, Defense Minister Ehud Barak was on the show, and I was talking to him off camera, and he said that ISIS can be beaten. And I talked to military people; they say ISIS can be beaten. Do you believe ISIS can be beaten?
No question. In fact, I don't think this is more than maybe a 3 to 6 month problem for us. ISIS is not 20 feet tall as we've made them out to be. I mean, if you look at the city of Ramadi, where I fought through the big battles of Ramadi in 2006, alongside some outstanding soldiers and Marines, and when the city of ISIS fell, I mean, the estimates of ISIS, when the city of Ramadi fell, the estimates for ISIS fighters was something like 300 to 400. So really a few hundred U.S. troops on the ground could have completely turned that situation around and handed ISIS an extraordinary defeat.
We only have 30 seconds left. Is ISIS a matter of national security for us or not?
Absolutely. If we don't do something about them over there now, they're going to come hit us here tomorrow.
Lieutenant Commander, thank you very much, sir.
Thanks for having me.
And earlier this week, the White House had left open the possibility of expanding the fight against ISIS from the air to the ground. But was Congress consulted about the decision? Iraq war veteran and New York Congressman Lee Zeldin joins us. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Greta.
Were you consulted at all about the decision that the president has about expanding? I guess the word he uses is sort of enhancing what we're doing in Syria.
Not at all. I learned just like everyone else did with the announcement that came out of the Obama administration, unfortunately, and there was no prior indication of what the strategy is. And even today, after the announcement, we still don't know what the strategy is to win. We just know that the president wants to send U.S. Special Operations Forces to the ground. And I believe that if we're going to ever send service members into a combat zone, if they're not being sent to win, they shouldn't be sent at all.
What do you sort of divine from watching from the outside, if they're not consulting? What is the president's strategy?
Well, I don't think the president has one. I would be happy to support a strategy to win if I believe that he actually did have one. I mean, right now, the White House spokesperson today said that that these ground forces aren't going on a combat mission, and I don't know what kind of a message that sends for that special operations service member, for their family, their friends, for any American who, when you drop a service member into a war zone. And you tell them that they're not on a combat mission, it's just completely divorced from reality. I want to know what the limitations are on their rules of engagement. I want to know whether or not those service members are going to have their hands tied behind their back while they're risking life and limb. And if you're going to set as a policy tying their hands behind their back when everything's going on around them with a threat, I'd like to know who's taking out the bad guys. I mean, our U.S. Special Operations soldiers, I mean, they are highly capable of carrying out very well-planned, exceptionally executed missions that could be critical to eliminating the threat.
And that was a picture, I don't know if you saw it, Master Sergeant Joshua Wheeler's put up on the screen. He's the man that we lost about a week ago in Iraq. Here's what bothers me, and I'm not a military person, obviously, Congressman, but Leif just said that there's too little. And I mean, it's sort of my think is either we send enough to accomplish it, and that if we send too little, that we're basically making them sitting ducks, and it's dangerous to the sort of the too little. Either do the job or not do the job, but not hang them out to dry. Am I right on that or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, American lives are at risk. This president, he plays checkers instead of chess. He doesn't play it very well. Just 2 months ago, I was at the Syrian border on the Golan Heights. Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah occupying villages just across the border. ISIS not too much further in the distance. I was firsthand, I realized just how much they are at all-out war. This is a very real threat that if it's not dealt with over there, we'll face it more and more at home.
And just as an aside, the White House did call his death a combat death, Wheeler's, but it was sort of this bizarre sort of thing where he said that he wasn't in combat. I mean, there was a whole sort of, they finally did say combat death, but I'll tell you, it was quite a struggle getting there. Anyway, Congressman, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Greta.